Ninth day, middle fire month, 1 CE, Liam. Nat burst through the open door of Liam's cell with a tearful cry. He parried her mouth attack, but couldn't evade the hug. Thank the gods you're safe. She buried her face in his chest. Did the paladins do anything mean to you? Those paladins serve the same gods you're thanking, you know. Why would the paladins do anything mean to me? He asked. Because they accused you of doing horrible things. It was those two noble houses that accused me. But the paladins did their bidding like evil goons. Liam sent a glance to the open door, but the paladin that had unlocked it wasn't there anymore. Much like people anywhere else in the northern human countries, the common folk of the Holy Kingdom switched allegiances as if it was second nature to them. What mattered wasn't the idea that they were part of a kingdom or the actions of some far-off group of people, but things like religion, culture, family, and who one answered to. Despite being raised as a citizen of Hobans and living there until a few weeks ago, Nat no longer identified as one. She was, first and foremost, Liam's wife, and his enemies were her enemies as well. She hated anyone that was mean to him. Liam served House Rastello, so any retainer of House Rastello was a friend, and House Rastello's cause was Liam's cause, which also made it Nat's cause, at least according to her understanding of things. I'm fine, Liam patted her straight brown hair. Once my trial is done, I'll come back home. But your trial's already done, Nat told him. Huh? That's why I'm here. Sir Jemena brought me with him to pick you up. More than slightly confused, he put on his vest and walked out of his cell, leaving the jail through the Holy Order office. There, he found Sir Jemena waiting for him. Liam, the knight offered him a tight smile. Good to see you didn't get fat on prison food. I had one meal? Liam frowned. What's this about my trial being over, sir? It's exactly as it sounds, Sir Jemena told him. You're free to go. Your shift starts in 2 hours, by the way. But I didn't attend any trial. Sir Jemena gave him an odd look. This is the Royal Court of Hobans, he told him. Not some baronial manor in a fishing village. No one enters the Royal Court without good cause. Lord Rastello successfully argued your case to the Holy King, and that's that. I see. Let him know I said thanks. Apparently, attending one's own trial wasn't a good enough reason for a commoner to stand in the royal court. A competent liege is always willing to defend valuable assets, Sir Jemena said. Unfortunately, they're also obliged to stand up for useless vassals. Fortunately, you're one of the former. The knight signed him out of the Holy Order office. He frowned slightly as Liam left his X beside his signature. The paladin at the counter checked over their paperwork before letting them go. Of course, neither Remedios nor Grandmaster Montagna was present to see them off. You should learn how to read and write, Sir Jemena told them as they walked through the palace grounds. It'll be essential if you want to rise any higher in House Rastello. I can teach you, Nat offered helpfully. Maybe after things aren't so crazy, Liam said. Supposedly, most people could only learn one language. Rogues had thieves' cant on top of that, and Liam was already schooled in the language of Riastais. Knowing that much was sufficient for most who lived in Erantal, as it meant that they could also understand modern Imperial. Upon crossing the gate into the Prime Estates, they were met with a sea of hostility. Dozens of liveried men, patrols and plainclothes alike, sent dark looks in their direction. Some got in their way while others fingered their weapons menacingly as they passed. Liam glanced at Nat, worried that she might be terrified at the reception, but she looked like she was about to jump out and bite them instead. Don't back down, Sir Jemena said as he brushed past a cocky-looking thug. If they try anything, it only works in our favor. Doesn't Lord Rastello stay here? Liam asked. It can't be very nice if the other houses are like this. He does, but the Holy Order's patrols keep the residents from being harassed. These guys are here specifically for you. Sir Jemena pushed through a group standing directly in their path. Liam slipped in behind him, holding Nat close. Murderer. Damned Rastello rogue. Get out of our city, demon assassin. Their insults weren't very imaginative, but he was pelted with them all the way to the fire gate. There, they were welcomed by a set of Rastello men. Sounds like fun in there, sir, the lead armsman said. Are Liam's famous, now, Sir Jemena grinned. A half-day in prison to lay House Vizela low. I sure wouldn't mind taking the entire capital like this. Liam sighed in annoyance. but the men took his reaction in good humor. Being famous was the opposite of what he wanted. Well, it's not as if I settled on any specific strategy. Getting involved just enough to move things in the right direction seemed to be doing the trick. If people were watching out for him now, he could exploit that just as easily. The shock surrounding the morning's event seemed to be fading and Hobans had returned to a semblance of its previous activity. Liam eyed a group of men pushing a wagon half-loaded with unmarked crates. "Did you have any trouble transporting the rest of the stuff, Nat?" "Nope. It was weird watching my mother buy it, though. All of my old neighbors, too. Oh, I finished your gauntlets." "Nice. Did you bring them to Raquel?" "Yeah. She said she's going to Cantu in the morning since she doesn't have to sell the food now. The merchant that took over for her is really pushy, though." "How so?" "He wants me to space out the shipments over the next 2 weeks. But that means the laborers we hired only get 1 hour of work a day. They were supposed to work all day today." They turned their heads at Sir Jimenez's dismissive snort. "Damn merchants are always like that," the knight said. "It's even worse out in the country. They make our tenants bring the harvest to them because they don't want to deal with the logistics. Then, when they go around peddling their wares to the villagers, they act as if they're doing everyone a massive favor. If you don't deal in coin, they won't even look at you. Everything's about money to them. They'll pay half a meal's worth of work to a man that's been waiting for half the day to find work to feed his whole family and act as if that's not their problem. Those merchants just use people up and discard them without a second thought. It's immoral, I tell you." Having grown up in a town himself, Liam was used to working like that. No one ever considered it immoral. "Maybe there's a better way to do things," Liam said. "There is," Sir Jimenez said. "Be a proper landlord with proper tenants. We don't have problems like the cities do. That's because you dump your spares in the towns and cities. Rural tenancies didn't worry about paying people hourly or daily wages because they essentially hired labor by the season. If a farm had too many mouths to feed, those mouths were kicked out. If they needed extra hands for the harvest, the local town was a convenient source. Ultimately, the problem was that there wasn't enough work. The rural elite just considered it a problem of urban peasants, and the merchants could hire whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, because they tended to have what everyone needed. In the Sorcerer's Kingdom, the problem was even more pronounced since a single Soul Eater could do the work of 20 freight wagons and their teams, but the lowered cost of living combined with the transitional regulations laid out by the administration prevented most of the employment issues that came with the new systems of transport. Upon crossing into House Vizella's jurisdiction, Liam paid careful attention to the behavior of both the citizens and the patrols. As expected, the locals were treating the patrols as something between pests and dangerous animals. House Vizella's men looked none too pleased about it, but they didn't have a leg to stand on when it came to addressing their treatment. "So what's happening with House Vizella?" Liam asked. "They're having the battle in the court right now," Sir Jimenez said. "Winning your case gave us a lot of momentum, so Lord Rastello expects a favorable result." "Can we expect a favorable result if the Royalists are the Holy King's power base?" Sir Jimenez gave Liam an appraising look. "That's a good question," the knight said. "A month ago, I'd have definitively said no. After getting a read of the city over the last few weeks, though, I don't think the royal court has a choice." "Why?" "Because things aren't like they were before the war. We have a weak king, Liam, and everyone knows it. Never mind the nobles, His Divine Grace has lost the confidence of the citizens. That makes things complicated. If the people don't trust the crown, then they must be appeased to keep the peace." "What does that mean for the country?" "Change," Sir Jimenez said. "But it's not all bad. We've had weak kings before. The nobles just have to step up and help tide things over. Caspion's reign will be remembered for its weak central governance and its strong aristocratic establishment. It will also probably be known as a period of great reform." He had to admire how they could stay positive no matter what. Every problem was an opportunity to bring in something better, at least by their standards. Upon returning to House Rastello's labor camp, they found Sir Luis and Sir Jorge waiting for them in the administrative office. Sir Jorge offered Liam a wide smile while Sir Luis only offered a cursory glance. "All right," Sir Jimenez crossed his arms. "What's the problem now?" "The royal court has issued a new edict," Sir Luis said. 1 in 20 hearths are required to provide one reservist to join the royal army." "What? But we just came out of a war. We'll be dealing with a lot of that, Sir Luis told them grimly. The edict only applies to citizens of the North. That's not going to go over well, Sir Jimena said. How has the royal court justified this? The South's paying for it. Fair enough. So, does that mean the Crown is reasserting its control over the North? I suppose it was nice while it lasted. Sir Luis shook his head, his grim look growing even more severe. No. The reservists are being sent to the wall. Huh? Are they reinforcing the Wilderness Campaign? Or is Riestais challenging us over it? Those particular details haven't been made public yet. Our task is to meet the quotas in both our rural and urban jurisdictions. It's 1 in 20 households, and we'll be passing over families that lost members during the war. So, let me get this straight. Our jurisdiction in Hobans is about to double in size, our manpower hasn't changed, and everyone is going to hate us. Did I miss anything? One other thing that I know of, Sir Luis said. Once we've met our quota, Lord Rastello is sending me to join the army as a regimental commander. He claims that the newly mobilized forces will require discipline, and I don't disagree, plus it's an opportunity for some sorely needed reform in the military. Plus the entire South is sending knights and scions of talent to serve as officers, Sir Jorge added. Our lord has no choice but to place loyal retainers in positions of power, or the royal army may give us trouble in the future. Sir Jimena raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose it's a dream come true for you, Luis, but where does that leave us? Who will be the new chief overseer for our holdings in the North? Will Lord Rastello be sending a replacement, or have the rest of us been consigned to a living hell of paperwork? That was as far as Lord Rastello got before the court trials started, Sir Luis said. I'll be recommending that he dispatch 2 additional knights to the camp to handle our increased responsibilities in Hobans. The other houses will be experiencing a similar shake-up, so the next few days are going to be interesting. What's our plan for the mobilization? Sir Jimena asked. I hope we're not spiriting people away in their sleep. Of course not. We'll let the other houses move first. Recent events have worked in our favor. We've been alleviating the economic strain on the citizens in our jurisdiction, while those same measures have been increasing resentment against the other houses. The royalists will be facing a lot more resistance than they otherwise would, so we'll see if anything blows up in their faces before we act. You'd think the citizens would be all too happy to be fed and given work. Yes, well, to us, duty is an honor. To commoners, it's an inconvenience. Stay sharp for any disturbances tonight. When haven't we? Sir Jimena offered a sardonic smile in response. They went their separate ways, with Liam, Nat, and Sir Jimena returning to B Company's camp. There, they found a young man curled up on the ground being beaten by a ring of familiar figures with spears. I think he's dead, Sir Jimena said. I don't know about that, sir, Diogo replied. He keeps trying to crawl off. What's happening, even? Liam said. Training. Like the one patrol bit we did with you yesterday. This is one of the new thief-takers. Thief-takers in training. Anyway, he's not a monster like a rogue, so there's some guesswork as to how much of a beating they can take. Ricardo heard they can regenerate like trolls. Liam was profoundly grateful that he hadn't been caught during their test drill the previous day. You're overdoing it, he told them. All else being equal, a rogue can't take as much of a beating as one of you. 6 of you guys at once are going to smash one into the cracks in the street, especially since you're going to be training every day from now on. Think we'll become as strong as knights? Who knows, Liam shrugged. But I bet you'll be able to perform martial arts sooner or later. The armsman's eyes grew wide. Liam looked up at Sir Jimena. It's possible, the knight said. Every man in Lord Rastello's personal guard can perform martial arts, and they all started out like you lot. It's damn expensive, so count yourself lucky that House Rastello's set on holding its ground in Hobans. The thief-taker peeked out from between the arms covering his head. They're not going to use martial arts on me during this training, are they? I'd like to go back to escorting caravans if that's the case. You're not going anywhere, Sir Jimena said. Everyone, fall in. We're going to have an interesting night tonight. You saying that last night wasn't interesting, sir? Oh, we've barely seen the beginning. B Company gathered in the mustering yard, their expressions of curiosity fading away as Sir Jimena let them know what was going on. Most of the men in the unit had come with House Rastello from the south, so rather than empathizing with the Northerners' situation, they looked like they were getting ready for a fight. Sir Luis and the other knights all agree that activity from House Vizella's side will be subdued. Like us, they'll be holding off on executing the Holy King's edict to see what the royal court's decision about their jurisdiction is. If it goes to House Rastello, they'll be dumping their nasty job on us. So we're just watching and waiting? No, Sir Jimena shook his head. Even waiting won't be as simple as it sounds. We have two major problems to deal with, and both of them have to do with flight risks. We'll have citizens attempting to evade their legal obligations by fleeing into our jurisdiction. Citizens in our jurisdiction who receive word of the mobilization may attempt to leave the city entirely. Our job tonight is to ensure that no one gets in or out. What if one of the families under us asks about the edict? Tell them the truth, but don't be harsh about it. It's 1 in 20 hearths, so there's no point in making people think that they're all going to be shipped to the wall. Once the briefing was over, Liam rushed back to his plot to get ready for the day. Nat had picked up breakfast for him and was inspecting a pair of boots at her workshop table. "Thanks for grabbing breakfast, Nat," he said as he sat down for his meal. "I drew a bath for you as well, dear," Nat smiled, then frowned. "Are you sure it was all right to fit these pieces of equipment to myself? Your hands and feet are bigger than mine." "Magic items adjust themselves to those who equip them," he told her. "Once everything gets enchanted, they'll fit me perfectly." "How does that work?" "I have no idea. It just does." Nat came over with the boots, placing them on a spare stool beside the table before sitting down with him. She seemed to be in a good mood for some reason. "I fitted the boots with steel toes, undersoles, and heels like you suggested," she said. "If they don't adjust to you as well as you say, it'll be pretty awkward moving around." "Was it hard to do?" "It took a while to figure out," Nat replied. "The blacksmith gave me a funny look when I asked for the metalwork, and I don't blame him. Making boots like these goes against all common sense." Liam finished breakfast and reached out to pick up one of the boots. The aforementioned metal plates were sandwiched between layers of leather and everything was held together by glue and heavy stitching. If what he understood about magic items was correct, all of the pieces would become one item that would function as any pair of boots would. The metal would not only make the item as a whole much more durable, but hurt a lot more if he kicked someone. Nat's modifications had the downside of making the boots a bit heavier, but that didn't matter much to him. "Are you delivering these to Raquel with me?" he asked. "Yep. We wouldn't want to miss her in the morning." He was pretty sure that the mage wouldn't leave without the boots she was supposed to enchant, but it would be a disaster if she did. After rushing through the rest of his preparations for the night watch, he left the labor camp with boots in one hand and Nat on the other. "So," Liam said, "have you gotten used to life in the camp, yet?" "I think so. Everyone is nice. The neighbors never run out of things to talk about. Everything today's been about what's happened since the morning, though." "What did they say?" Nat usually updated him on camp gossip, courtesy of all the bored wives in the camp all around them, after he got up in the evening, but it was a process that usually took over an hour while he prepared for the day. It never ceased to amaze him how warped information could get in the span of a few short hours, but it did give him useful hints on how to exploit the expectations and fears of the other houses. "Everyone's saying that you're the assassin that killed Iago Lauser," Nat said. "Not our people, the others. They say it took a paladin to beat you and send you to jail." "People think that even after the trial today?" "I think so. All those mean people in the Prime Estates were trying really hard to make everyone believe that what they were saying is true. That the royalists broadly refused to recognize the verdict of the royal court was a telling sign of the Holy King's ever-waning power. The crown had no money, and, even if the ranks of the royal army were restored to their old numbers, the fact that it was being staffed by officers from the south cast doubt upon whether it could be used to enforce the Holy King's will. "Has anyone given you trouble over it?" Liam asked. "I don't want you to get hurt because of what people are saying about me." "Only when we went through the Prime Estates," Nat said. "I couldn't believe they were allowed to do that. What Sir Jimena told us was probably right." "Nat." Mrs. Abarca's voice drew them from their conversation. Nat's mother was standing in front of her family's leatherworking workshop, clutching her broom in her hands. Liam stopped a few meters away as Nat went up to speak to her. "What's wrong, Mother?" I I heard a disturbing rumor, dear. At this point, Liam could think of any number of disturbing rumors floating around him, House Rastello, and the Holy Kingdom in general. It was surprisingly surprising how many the country had developed in the short time since he had arrived. If it's about Liam, it's about the army, Josefa said. People are saying that the royal court is conscripting for the wall again. That's right, Nat replied. House Rastello is responsible for making sure the quotas are met for the households around here, but we won't be doing it right away. People should have time to settle their affairs before then. What's the quota? Josefa asked in a small voice. 1 in 20 hearths, Nat answered. They're skipping over families that lost members during the invasion. Nat's mother fell silent, her face turning ashen grey. Liam didn't know if the Abarca family qualified, but he had a feeling he wasn't going to like what she would say next. If your brother's lot is drawn, Josefa asked, could you go in his place? What? Josefa's panic grew at Nat's silence. He's your only brother, Nat. Someone has to carry on the family name and inherit the shop. Liam stormed forward with barely restrained fury. Before he could speak, however, Nat gripped his arm. I'll see if I can figure something out, she said. Nat. Liam looked incredulously at the girl. Let's go, Liam. They walked across the street to drop off his new boots at Raquel's place before Nat led them back toward Rimian Gate. She hugged his arm tightly, closing her eyes and rubbing her cheek against his shoulder. Thanks for getting mad for me, she said. She was wrong to ask you that, Liam muttered. You're not even a reservist. No, she was right, Nat replied. I only have one brother. What about their one daughter? Nat looked up at him, an amused smile tracing her lips. A son is a son, she said, and a daughter is a daughter. No one's had to choose before, but now that they have a choice, sending their daughter is the correct decision. As Mother said, they need him to carry on the family name and inherit the shop. If he dies, he was accustomed to places that prioritized men over women, but he never imagined a place where soldiers were always assumed to be men yet the people preferred to send their daughters. What Nat and her mother discussed made a sort of twisted sense, but it sickened him nonetheless. From what he knew of him, Nat's brother didn't seem like a very admirable guy, either. I don't care, he said. I'm not letting you go. You're not even a part of their household anymore. He's still my brother. I have to do what I can. They arrived at Kalincha Gate, where Nat went up to see Sir Jimena. The knight gave her a curious look, then his gaze went to Liam, who looked at Nat. What's this all about? Sir Jimena asked. Liam gently nudged Nat forward. Nat licked her lips nervously before speaking. Sir Jimena, she said, you mentioned that the South exempted themselves from conscription by funding the rearmament and mobilization of conscripts in the North, right? In addition to sending skilled veterans to serve as officers, yes. Can I do that too? Nat asked. The knight's expression shifted, looking more puzzled than anything. As Liam's wife, he told her, you're part of a southern household. You're not being considered for conscription even if you were born to a northern family. It's not for me, Nat replied. It's for my brother. My family qualifies for conscription, and he's the only son of the workshop. Sir Jimena's gaze went to Liam again. Is this your idea? No, sir, Liam replied. We just came from speaking to Nat's mother and Nat didn't say what she had in mind. I see, Sir Jimena said. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to. Really? Liam frowned. Why are you surprised? The knight said, the crown has millions of reservists available. What they're lacking is finances. If you're willing to sponsor one soldier, that's one less soldier's worth of debt that the crown has to shoulder. Liam couldn't figure out whether that was fair or not. Many people would consider it a pragmatic give and take, but others might see it as a formalized bribe. How come we didn't do that for mandatory service? Liam asked. There are some professions out there that are worth far more driving the industries of the country than they are serving on the front lines. Not everything is about money, Sir Jimena told him. Mandatory service was important in fostering a sense of unity and identity with one's fellow citizens. But sponsoring is fine now that it's not the same form of military service? That's right. In that case, Liam said, there's another woman I'd like to bring up for consideration. Nat seemed to stiffen and looked over her shoulder at him. Sir Jimena's lip twitched at her reaction. Thinking of getting a new wife already? No. It's the mage that I hired to enchant equipment for me. She's the only member of her household and didn't lose anyone to the war, so she qualifies for conscription. If her lot gets drawn, she'd go straight to the army. She's more valuable to the Holy Kingdom as an enchanter than a soldier, especially if all those new army officers want magical equipment. I suppose that makes sense. Does this enchanter have a name? Raquel. I'll come by with her in the morning. It occurred to Liam that the order to keep people from leaving the city would have caused all sorts of grief for the mage, who was supposed to leave for Cantor in the morning. Thankfully, Nat's idea both brought his attention to the problem and provided a permanent solution for it. Their business with Sir Jimena completed, Liam walked Nat back to the entrance of the labor camp before heading back to begin yet another shift of the night watch. Out of what was probably an unwise sense of curiosity, he revealed himself to a house over patrol as it was making its way along the boundary street with House Rastello. Several seconds passed before one of the armsmen noticed him standing on the rooftop in the twilight. He shouted out a warning to his fellows, drawing his sidearm and pointing it at Liam. The entire patrol stood frozen, unwilling to take their eyes off of him. Liam smiled to himself. That smile caused the entire patrol to back away several steps. Without personally taking a single life, he had become the most notorious assassin in the Holy Kingdom of Roble. 6th day, Middle Fire Month, 1 CE. You were ordered to apply pressure on Lauza, Antonio said. Not turn him into a martyr. Neither I nor any of my associates had a hand in that, sir, Eduardo replied. From his seat behind the desk of his office, Antonio Cohen fixed his son in place with the cold fury of his glare. Something that shouldn't have happened had happened, and the damage was incalculable. It wasn't me, Antonio sneered. So say they all. Do you believe that such a flimsy defense will survive for even a second in court? No, sir. But what more can we say? None of our men or our allies were anywhere close to Lauza's location. The only thing that our enemies require to act is a motive. They will formulate favorable conjectures and exploit any rumor. Addressing the issue with Iago Lauza was not simply confronting him on the matter, but exercising control over the entire situation surrounding him. Which we were in the process of preparing for, Eduardo said. The net had barely left our hands when Lauza's labor camp went up in flames. I know of no man alive that could have exercised control in a situation where the blow against us was set to land a half step into our operation. An angry sigh escaped Antonio's nostrils. He should have never indulged his son's martial pursuits. The boy had even traveled to the Empire several times to learn what he could about their armed forces. While his drive for martial excellence admittedly made him a highly skilled commander and a powerful combatant, his imbalanced focus left him lacking in other fields. Your operation doesn't just end if your target happens to die, Antonio told him. Even if you perceive the situation to be a failure, the consequences of that failure must be mitigated through the means that you have at your disposal. You allowed word to spread of the incident when you were in the ideal position to stop it. The one chance that they had to prevent catastrophe had slipped through their fingers. Now, they were at the mercy of a storm of speculation and intrigue. It was hardly an ideal position, sir. We didn't have the men to do as you say. Are you saying that the 10,000 men between all of the participating houses were somehow insufficient to corral a ragtag band of cowherds? I'm saying that those 10,000 men were incapable of operating in the fashion required to cordon off that labor camp. If you had acted on my recommendation to... Oh, you're bringing that up now? Yes, I am. We have long had the means to raise a true, professional army. Because we lacked the will to carry out what was necessary, all I had to work with was a mob of amateurish armsmen. This battle was ours to lose and we lost it years ago because of that very same complacent attitude. Antonio rose from his seat, his lips pressed into a thin line. You and everyone involved in this mess are to return to their places in the east. Our enemies will seize any chance to build up their new momentum, and will not so easily offer any to them. Your mother will want to see you before you leave. Antonio went to pour himself a drink while Eduardo walked out of the solar. Several moments after the door closed, Sir Torres moved from where he was standing near the balcony. He's right, you know. Of course he is, Antonio said. He has too much self-respect to lash out with insubstantial arguments like some useless layabout. Eduardo has the makings of an excellent heir, especially with that fool Caspond on the throne, but the boy's weaknesses are far too glaring. Speaking of glaring, I'm surprised you lost to a cowherd from the middle of nowhere. I'm not sure that it was a cowherd, my lord. Those ranchers are effectively light cavalry, but my opponent faced me on foot. A mercenary? An adventurer? Or a worker? He considered what that might mean. The need for security was understandable, and Lauser may have hired a small army to defend his holdings. If true, it made the claim that he had been assassinated in his own home even more unbelievable. What do you make of this faceless one now leading Lauser's leavings? I hear that most of the leadership that surrounded Lauser was killed along with him. Are you suggesting that a third party had planned this all along? It's all too convenient, Antonio said. I somehow doubt it was Debonai's doing, however. A petty interest looking to seize power in the chaos is the more likely culprit. What will we do about it? Antonio snorted at the knight's question. Though strong and reliable, he was a bit of a simpleton. This isn't some game played for entertainment, Taurus. There are countless pieces on the board, and even a noble house can only move a few. Most people have little to no control at all, including this faceless one. No matter who this person is, they have no choice but to cling to Debonai for survival. Events have played into our enemies' hands without them needing to lift a finger. He drained his glass and returned to his desk to draw up new orders for his vassals. Preparations had to be made for the storm that was sure to come. I don't want to do this. Then don't. Naya's helpless whimper filled the cabin of the carriage as it conveyed them west to the city of Rimune. It was a popular place to visit for the people of the Holy Kingdom, and she had even been there on holiday once with her parents, but the reason they were going now had little to do with leisure. If anything, she had no choice but to go. You could have done this on your own, Naya said. As if an 11-year-old girl would be taken seriously, Say rolled her eyes. And a 15-year-old woman is any better? A little bit, the bard replied. But the important part is that you're the faceless one. I still don't know how that became so important. It's popular. It's scary, Naya cried. You know, I had a dream the other day where I woke up and went to wash my face. When I looked at my reflection in the water, my face was gone. It was as if the dream was telling her that Naya Baraha was going to disappear, replaced by whatever people saw her as. She didn't like the look that her eyes gave her, but she also didn't want to lose them. The rest of her face was perfectly fine, too. That's neat, Say said. I should use that for a story. Don't use me for a story. Too late. You. Naya whimpered again, looking out the window as their carriage rumbled along. The sea had already come into view, meaning that they were just a few hours away from their destination. I should just let the merchants we brought with us do the talking. They'll do their part, Say said, but the nobles won't settle for less than the faceless one for the main negotiations. Naya's purpose in Rimune was to negotiate a trade agreement with the nobles. It turned out that cutting ties with the group that delivered half of her people's supplies made said supplies dwindle away at an alarming rate. Frustratingly, their quest for justice had to be put on hold until they could find food and other necessities. From the outset, their options were to raid or find new people to trade with. Raiding, of course, was out of the question. They weren't savages, after all. At first, their problems were alleviated by the other ranchers Naya had rallied to her cause. The death of Iago Lauser had shaken them all, and their desire for protection against the royalists made joining hands with her people a matter of course. Since everyone in the north was surviving on credit until they could deliver their produce to market, however, their assistance only slowed the drain on Naya's supplies. In the end, they had to turn to the nobles for help. Not the royalists, of course, but their enemies, the so-called conservatives who actually used to be the royalists. Life was already confusing enough for her, but the world insisted on making it even more so. I hope they'll help. Asking for supplies to feed a small army out of nowhere is normally an impossible request. Say scowled, you're doing it again. Doing what? Thinking about stupid things. I hope they're nice or something like that. I can see the daisy sprouting out of your head. Naya's hand went up to touch her perpetual cowlick. Humans don't sprout flowers. And what's wrong with hoping that people will be nice? You're going there to negotiate as a potential player in their camp, Say told her, not beg for arms. You can't afford to fail, you have to do everything in your power to secure this deal. Your best chance to do that is convincing the Conservatives that they need you and what your people have to offer. Going into talks as if you're a vagrant will put you in the worst position possible. They had reviewed this all already, of course. Her best chance of landing a deal with the Conservatives was to present her people as a faction that could aid them in their struggle against the Royalists. Still, there were things that worried her. What if the nobles propose an alliance? Naya asked. Then I guess you'll have to drop your pants and bend over. Weren't you worried about being single, anyway? Ugh. Almost no one married for love, so it was unreasonable to think that she might be an exception. Still, Naya had nursed some unlikely hopes in her heart since her parents had managed to make it happen. It's a small price to pay to keep tens of thousands of people from starving, Say said. Since you're a commoner, you'll be marrying up, as well. But my lord husband probably won't let me ride around the countryside rallying more followers. The Conservatives need more power, so he probably wouldn't mind so long as you don't put yourself in harm's way. Leaders shouldn't be doing that anyway unless they're super strong. Naya's long sigh filled their cabin. She had to use every means at her disposal, including the fact that she was a woman. If an alliance with the nobles was proposed, then the strength of her following would be something like her dowry. They arrived at Rimmion's eastern gate just before the sun touched the sea. The gatehouse had been fixed up since she last saw it near the end of the war, but it wasn't the newly reconstructed fortifications that captured her attention. A cheer went up as she opened the door of the carriage, not quite believing what she saw. Thousands of people crowded the sides of the highway and even the city walls, smiling and raising their hands and voices in welcome. Naya's eyes widened as two familiar figures stepped out from the crowd to approach her. Mr. Morrow. She smiled. Mrs. Diaz. You were both in Rimyon? Indeed, Miss Baraja. Bertrand Morrow and Angelina Diaz lowered their heads. We received word that you would be visiting Rimyon. I hope you don't mind the modest reception we've arranged. Her head turned as her gaze went over the jubilant crowd. Statistically speaking, at least 1 in 100 citizens in the Northern Holy Kingdom were members of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps by the end of the war. They started popping up like bunya once Naya started rallying people to rectify the injustice that had fallen upon the North, but what she saw around her was far beyond her expectations. I'm overwhelmed. Naya wiped a tear from her cheek, but gathering this many people must have been expensive. Mr. Morrow frowned slightly. Expensive, Miss Baraja? Prices for everything have been high since the end of the war, haven't they? That's true, but I believe that the nobles have done an admirable job of managing the recovery. Combined with your teachings, I dare say that your followers are doing well for themselves. What? Now that he mentioned it, she realized that the city of refugee tents raised in the shadow of Rimyon's walls was gone. There was no sign of any labor camps, either. Everywhere she looked, the people seemed energetic, healthy, and well-fed. Shall we go and see the people, Miss Baraja? Mr. Morrow asked. As much as I'd like to, Naya replied, I don't want to keep the nobles waiting. You should spend some time with the people, Say told her. Eh? Why? Our position has drastically changed, the bard told her. The nobles will have agents out in the city. We need to give them time to digest the fact that you have so much popular support. If you rush into a negotiation right now, they might see it as a sign of aggression. Is that so? Well, if you insist. Who is this young lady? Mr. Morrow asked. This is Say, Naya answered. She's a bard that I met while I was working for Mr. Lauser. She's been helpful in various ways. Is there a problem with her suggestion? No. On the contrary, her analysis of the situation and the appropriate plan of action is surprisingly astute for one of her young age. While not an aristocratic house, Mr. Morrow's family had made a name for themselves by producing men who served as capable stewards for some of the North's notable houses. Bertrand Morrow had served as one before the war as well, so Naya was relieved to know that he agreed with Say's suggestion. While Naya had a following, she never really thought about its implications beyond her desire to see the Sorcerer King's wisdom embraced throughout the country. Say was far more aware than she was about diplomacy and politics, and, since the death of Mr. Lauser, Naya had relied heavily on the bard for her knowledge and expertise in those fields. Things went mostly according to plan aside from their attempt at contacting the Conservatives in Lloyd's, which was closer to them than Rimyon, only to find that the Royalists had taken control over the city. Is it possible to hire a better carriage? Say asked, This was the best we could find for the journey. Of course, Mr. Morrow said. Is that necessary? Naya asked. It's not necessary, Say answered, but it will help. We'll be staying at the Summer Palace, and parking our beat-up old carriage beside all the fancy noble ones won't do us any favors. Naya's steps came to an abrupt halt. Wait, we're staying at the Summer Palace? Of course, the bard told her. We're going to negotiate with the conservative faction. Since they're hosting us, they're obliged to show us the hospitality appropriate to a faction representative. Doing so raises their prestige, and there's an expectation that we reciprocate their hospitality by helping to elevate that prestige even further. You make it sound as if nobles just go in circles puffing each other up, Naya said. That's what ignorant city people would say. There's a point to it, though. Indeed, Mr. Morrow nodded. It's a form of ritualized advertising if one puts it in merchant terms. Additionally, the ideas and information that nobles convey go beyond mere monetary matters. Also, while many from the city may consider those rituals an extravagance, they forget that the cost to host guests in rural areas is quite cheap. But we're in a city, Naya noted. Indeed, if this were Hobans, the costs involved would be prohibitive. Rimune, however, is a port. Blah. It was a reminder of something she didn't want to be reminded of. The transportation costs involved in carting something like grain from Rimune could be just as much as the price of the grain itself. The ranch lands were in the North's interior and usually imported supplies from the south through the northern port city of Lloyd's, which was now under the control of the Royalists. Due to Lloyd's placement on the northern coast, using a fishing village or town as an alternative port was also out of the question. The position of the Kingswood made every road pass through Lloyd's sphere of influence on their way to the interior. She did not doubt that excessive tolls and taxes would be extracted from their caravans using some characteristically twisted legal interpretation if they tried to bring in goods through lands that were under Royalist control. Naya spent the next hour walking through the city streets and greeting her followers. It was more awkward than she had expected, as everyone remembered something about her, but she was lucky if she could remember a handful of them. Once she was done, Mr. Morrow brought them to his modest apartment in the city's common area. There, they sat around his dining table while the former butler provided a briefing on the status of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps. I must apologize in advance for my lack of complete information, Mr. Morrow said. The situation of our members in the East is unknown and attempts to contact them have failed to elicit a response. We also attempted to contact you, Miss Baraha, but I'm not sure if you received our letters. That's probably because I don't live in Hobans any longer, Naya said. Sorry about that. The conditions in the East are terrible in general. The city folk can barely afford to feed themselves and the countryside is trapped in the iron fist of the Royalists. I was shocked to see how well Rimune was doing compared to Hobans. The former butler nodded gravely at her account. The nobles here assert that what you said is the case, he said, but we found those accounts so absurd that we assumed that anyone circulating the information was either fooled or paid to propagate a narrative that served to support the conservatives' position. Did you hear about Iago Lauser? Say asked. I heard that he was granted the title of the Black. Oh. He's dead now. The Royalists had him and all of his closest subordinates assassinated in his own home. Naya stared down glumly at the table. She still wanted to believe that his death had just been a bad dream, but it was very much a part of the waking nightmare that so many citizens of the North now lived. I don't know what to say, Mr. Morrow said. Surely, an atrocity of this magnitude has not gone unanswered. Naya shook her head. As I mentioned, the Royalists have complete control. Any investigation conducted will of course place the blame on something else. I can't help but wonder if all of those accidents just after the war were something similar. If that's true, Mr. Morrow said, then something has taken root in the Holy Kingdom that wasn't there before. Do you believe that the Conservatives can be trusted? Naya asked. After what happened with the Royalists, I find it hard to trust any noble these days. The only thing we were suspicious of were those rumors. The nobles here otherwise act as anyone would expect from the southern aristocracy. No one's mentioned anything amiss and I doubt we would miss it with how many of us there are. Out of curiosity, Naya said, how many people are in the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps now? In Rimune Prefecture, roughly 200,000. 2. Most are in the villages, Mr. Morrow said. Only around 2,000 are in the city itself. Those numbers include women and children, of course. That was still a lot of people. It seemed that the Sorcerer King's wisdom was being embraced where the people weren't being oppressed so severely that securing the next meal occupied every waking thought. Are the temples giving you any trouble? No, Mr. Morrow shrugged. It isn't as if we're a competing religion. I see. That's good. Say's eyes went between Naya, Mr. Morrow, and Mrs. Diaz. If you're not a religion, she asked, then what are you? The temples consider us a moral philosophy, Naya said. You know, like that one those monks you sometimes see from the other parts of the continent practice. Buddhism. What's the difference between a religion and a moral philosophy? In a religion, people worship a divine being. Moral philosophies are usually a framework for how one conducts their lives. For example, Buddhists venerate a Buddha for their wisdom and endeavor to follow their teachings, but they don't worship that Buddha as a god. Similarly, we venerate the Sorcerer King for his wisdom and also strive to follow His Majesty's teachings. I suppose you could call us disciples of His Majesty the Sorcerer King. I see. Is there anything else? If you're looking for something provable that distinguishes a moral philosophy from a religion, priests of a moral philosophy aren't divine casters. Instead, they're spiritual casters. Their power doesn't come from belief in a god, but adherence to the way of life that they follow. Does that mean the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps has priests like Buddhism does? To be honest, I hadn't thought about that at all. Naya's followers didn't stop worshipping the four great gods, nor did anyone expect them to, so it wasn't as if they lacked temple services like healing and spiritual consultation. Buddhism had been officially syncretized by the temples since many spells cast by Buddhist monks invoked the power of elemental gods, though she was pretty sure that Buddhists didn't care what the temples thought about them. Naya's followers were even easier to accept, as they were already part of the temple's congregation. They just happened to have a different approach to life. Well, Say said, maybe you should. Later. It's getting late. She twisted in her seat to look out the nearest window. Mr. Morrow's home was on the third floor of a shophouse overlooking the Western Ocean, and Naya discovered that only the barest traces of twilight were left on the horizon. I hope it's not too late, Naya said. Does what we know now change anything I have to say? You have a lot more support behind you now, Say said, but the basic objectives are still the same. For the same reason, the nobles will probably be trying to figure out how to use you and your people for their own ends. I have zero confidence in being able to just feel my way through this. She had spent every moment of her trip that wasn't sleeping or speaking to people preparing for the meeting. Say had even tortured her by not letting her eat until the bard was satisfied with her progress. Those preparations were made with what they had before arriving in Remion in mind, however. Learning about the state of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps probably changed a lot of things. Say was right about meeting their basic objectives, though. As long as Naya could make sure her people didn't starve, she would count it as a win. Just don't do that thing where you look like a goblin with constipation, Say said. Did she do something like that? As for the rest, the bard looked over at Mr. Morrow and Mrs. Diaz. Would you two like to come as attendants? The welcome at the gate was impressive, but she needs to keep the right type of people around her to maintain the appearance of importance. Of course, Mr. Morrow nodded. Mrs. Diaz went running off to find her festival dress at home. Naya and Say went outside while Mr. Morrow changed, finding a fancy carriage on the street waiting for them. Say looked at it for a long moment before dragging a dozen men from their escorting company to a boutique and buying each of them a new set of clothes. It was 2 hours past sunset when they were finally ready to go. Mr. Morrow and Mrs. Diaz joined Naya and Say in the carriage, conducting a last-minute review as they made their way to the Summer Palace. Do you know who is present at the palace? Say asked. All we know is that the conservatives helping to administer the North are based there. In addition to them, Mr. Morrow replied, Duke de Bonai has moved his court to the Summer Palace. The Duke? Naya's stomach started to churn. Well, it is his palace. And it's summer. Oh. I knew that. Shortly after the war, Duke de Bonai purchased the Summer Palace from the Crown. Practically speaking, it was to help finance the North's recovery. Officially, it was stated that the Duke would restore the ruined palace and maintain the cultural legacy of the royal dynasty. Rumor on the street, however, suggested that Duke de Bonai had always wanted the Summer Palace for himself. Additionally, it was said that he was jealous of Queen Kalka's success in transforming the complex into a well-known national icon and sought to prove himself superior to her by taking over its management. For Naya's part, her brain just stopped working at the part where someone had enough money to buy a whole palace. Now, she was helplessly hurtling towards her meeting with that unfathomable existence.